Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel, and episode 30, part 2 of the Jimi Hendrix story, like you've never heard it before. In this episode, we continue the deep dive into January of 1969, featuring the concerts and itinerary associated with Hamburg, Dusseldorf, Cologne, and the Munster gigs of the 1969 European tour. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances, and stunning photographs from the period. Saturday the 11th of January, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience performs 2 shows at the Musikhalle Hamburg in West Germany, supported by Heir Apparent. Setlist for the first show: Are You Experienced? Johnny B. Good, Spanish Castle Magic, Getting My Heart Back Together Again, Fire, I Don't Live Today, Red House, The Sunshine of Your Love, and Voodoo Child Slight Return. And second show: Spanish Castle Magic, Getting My Heart Back Together, I Don't Live Today, Red House, Sunshine of Your Love, Driving South, Foxy Lady, and Voodoo Child Slight Return. A review of a surviving poor-quality audience recording is as follows. There is a lot of distortion related to the high volume, and Jimmy's voice is inaudible most of the time. If we cannot really discuss the music, we can make a few comments on the repertoire. The group opens with Are You Experienced?, which it will only play twice subsequently, and above all continues with Johnny Be Good, one of the only versions ever performed by the Experience. The audio quality is such that it is impossible to appreciate the musicality. Here My Trainer Come In is synonymous with high hopes in a setlist, but the audio quality cuts short any debate. Jimmy's rhythm guitar completely covers his vocals. Surprisingly, Jimmy quotes the riff from the Beatles' I Feel Fine, a quote generally reserved for Hey Joe. The central solo of I Don't Live Today seems very adventurous from a sonic point of view, but it is impossible to make any assumptions about its musicality. Jimmy quotes the theme from Third Stone from the Sun. Jimmy seems to be moaning during the final solo. The introduction to Red House, where I seem to recognize the sound of Jimmy's white Gibson SG, is one of the passages that comes across best. The singing is finally audible because the guitar responds to it. On the other hand, things go wrong during the central solo. The bass solo of Sunshine of Your Love is cut. Only the end of Voodoo Child Slight Return, where Jimmy plays a few seconds alone, is vaguely musical as the saturation is great. While in terms of the music press, January 11th saw the Jimi Hendrix Experience appear in the following publications. Daily Mirror, with the article, Hallelujah, It's Hendrix in Handel's Old House. New Musical Express, where Electric Ladyland sits at number 11 on the top 15 albums chart. Disc and Music Echo, with Electric Ladyland at 16 on the top 20 LPs chart. Melody Maker, where Electric Ladyland was similarly placed at 16 on the top 20 albums chart. And Top Pops, featuring the article, The Return of the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Sunday the 12th of January, and the Experience performs 2 shows at the Rheinhalle Dusseldorf, with support act the Heir Apparent. It is later this evening that the first meeting with Monica Dannemann, the last person to see Jimmy alive, takes place. Concert set list for the first show: Spanish Castle Magic, Foxy Lady, Fire, Red House, The Sunshine of Your Love, Come On Part 1, and Purple Haze. The set list for the second concert: Spanish Castle Magic, Foxy Lady, Fire, Red House, Sunshine of Your Love, Come On, Part 1, Purple Haze, and Voodoo Child. Following the gig, Jimmy participates in a jam session at Club 66 in Dusseldorf. The following review appeared in the REINISCHE Post, titled Jimmy's Guitar Tricks Vanished in the Noise, the Hendrix Experience at the Rheinhalle, Deafening of the Crowd by Uwe Witsch. Physical impressions dominated the performance of the Jimi Hendrix Experience at the Rheinhalle. First, one was squashed by a packed crowd at the entrance, and after that, the ears were treated to electronic rock sounds. When the show was over, the audience was sitting apathetically in their seats and applauded wearily. The stage wasn't rushed, and so the security had surprisingly little to do. Jimi Hendrix's tour of Germany was well prepared. After a successful stay in the USA, the abominable musician released an explosive record, Electric Ladyland. The song All Along the Watchtower made the charts. Moreover, Hendrix was preceded by his reputation of pulling all the stops during his performances. He holds the record for having smashed 16 guitars on stage in a very short time. Besides, this grandson of a Cherokee Indian is considered the best pop guitar player of the world. Therefore, it is no wonder that even during the second show at the Rheinhalle on Sunday evening, there was a large crowd. An Irish band with an exotic name warmed up the audience. When Jimi Hendrix, with Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums, entered the stage, a hurricane broke loose. In the deafening noise, Jimmy's unarticulated singing was barely understandable, and the difference between each separate song was hardly noticeable. It was easier to watch rather than listen to Jimmy work his guitar. When he was concentrating on his playing, eyes closed, a slightly insane expression lay on his dark face. Then the ecstatic sounds were whizzing through the hall, confusing and not quite comprehensible. The floor vibrated, and a light tickle went through your body. Author Cesar GLEBEEK, in a piece titled Foxy Paper, noted, "There were 5,000 people in the hall, acting enthusiastic, which resulted in a very nice atmosphere, while the audience in Düsseldorf stayed rather reserved. Occasionally girls even screamed, probably encouraged by the energetic crowd. The performance was better than the day before. It certainly was more spontaneous." Immediately after the end of Purple Haze, the audience began to shout for an encore, but this did not materialize as a 1-hour Jimi Hendrix Experience show. At 22:25 minutes is just that, not a minute longer than contractually stipulated. Monday, the 13th of January. Jimmy takes part in an autograph session at Dumont Cologne Studios and is interviewed. The event is filmed and later broadcast as part of the German television program Beat Club. In the evening, the Experience performs 2 shows, with the group Era apparent, at the Sporthalle Cologne, West Germany. Set list for the first show: Come On Part 1, Foxy Lady, Red House, Voodoo Child Slight Return, Fire, Spanish Castle Magic, Hey Joe, The Sunshine of Your Love, and Purple Haze. As for the concert, the audio quality of the Cologne concert is indeed excellent. Musically, it's unfortunately more uneven. The version of Come On Part 1 is perhaps the highlight of the day. It is remarkable for its intensity. Foxy Lady is solid, while some titles are a bit sloppy. Fire gives the feeling of being rushed. Jimmy falls back into one of his faults, namely playing some of his compositions at too high a tempo. Hey Joe is also attacked at a too fast pace, as if Jimmy wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible. His singing, not very applied, seems to confirm this hypothesis. The version of Red House has some lengths, and Jimmy completely misses some of his shots. Jimmy cites Clapton's solo of Cat Squirrel on Spanish Castle Magic, whose version lacks depth. Cream is in the spotlight today. On Sunshine of Your Love, Jimmy begins his solo by quoting Clapton's. Noel's bass solo, and the traditional quotation of Outside Woman Blues, the group launches into an apocalypse improvisation, which may have disconcerted more than one person that evening. We are closer to a certain free jazz than to Cream in this case. Libertarian tendencies extended on Star Spangled Banner, where Jimmy tears his national anthem to pieces. Purple Haze feels like the end of a concert. Energy takes precedence over musicality. Better than the horrible concerts in Stockholm, the performance in Cologne still shows a group on the verge of implosion. Between the songs played without conviction and the free dissonances of Jimmy, this path is dead end in the world of pop rock. According to Cesar GLEBEEK, who attended this concert along with the one the day before, this show was of better quality than the previous one. The audience was less reserved and the performance more spontaneous. The following is a review of the concert titled, "Jimmy raged about at the Sporthalle like a bullfighter, and 5,000 fans stamped like bulls by Wolfgang Janssen." About 5,000 fans screamed their throats hoarse last Monday evening during a 1-hour non-stop show by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. "Jimmy, Jimmy," the Sporthalle roared, and the thunderous applause would not come to an end. No doubt this was the hottest and at the same time loudest show that the Halle in Köln had experienced during its existence. Psychedelic king Jimi Hendrix and his Experience provided an evening of superlatives, one which the fans from the Rhine district would not forget very quickly. The first of the Hendrix disciples would show up in front of the Sporthalle as early as 2 hours before the start of the show. The fans were nervous. Like little children before Christmas, they could hardly wait to see their idol at last in the flesh. I wanted to know what they expected from Jimmy. "In the first place, I'm interested in his music," Gerd Jackson and Herwig Klotz told me. "It is the message of the young people of the world." While also on the 13th of January, The following piece appeared in Der Spiegel. Tuesday the 14th of January sees the group performing at the Halle Münsterland Münster with support act, the heir apparent, concert setlist. Come On Part 1, Spanish Castle Magic, Red House, Fire, Foxy Lady, All Along the Watchtower, Hey Joe, Voodoo Child, Slight Return, and A Purple Haze. Note the following commentary of the concert audio recording. The 1969 European tour hardly has a good reputation. It is true that the two soundboard concerts in Stockholm are among the worst of Jimmy's entire career. Nothing like this here. An enthusiastic Jimi Hendrix is officiating, in an excellent atmosphere. He communicates with the public in an obvious good humor. We hear him laughing. He even asks his audience what song they want to hear. Some highlight. This is a rock concert that we are attending here. No long instrumental jams and a moderate share of extended versions. Electric Ladyland is in the spotlight here. This is the only concert of his career where he offers 3 tracks to his audience. We have the right to the one and only documented version of All Along the Watchtower by The Experience. The group attacks with the cover of Come On Part 1, originally immortalized on Electric Ladyland. It's an energetic, successful version, despite 1 or 2 hesitations, where Jimmy uses quite a few elements present on the studio version during his solos. He distances himself from the blues during the first. Unlike the studio version, Jimmy here sings 2 verses after the central solo. Jimmy announces a track from their second album, then launches the introduction to Spanish Castle Magic. Unfortunately, he encounters noticeable inaccuracy problems shortly before the central solo. He takes advantage of the latter to retune himself, but it goes without saying that it is weighted accordingly. A shame, because the interpretation is of quality. Jimmy then tells his audience that he is going to calm things down and responds to the many requests that he knows which songs to play. He then begins Red House, of which it is a very good version. The construction of the central solo is typical of the versions of the time. The intensity is followed by the jazzy passage, where Jimmy alternates percussive chords and licks, followed by an a cappella, wah-wah style, preceding a new intense passage. Jimmy is in good shape. He gets involved in his singing, and his enthusiasm even translates into a few laughs. What song do you want to hear now? Fire bursts out from the audience, and Jimmy immediately attacks the characteristic introduction. The group delivers a compact and effective version of this title that they master to perfection. Jimmy then dedicates the following title to all the groupies. Shut up and listen. Unsurprisingly, the feedback from Foxy Lady follows shortly. Jimmy's solo takes up the basics of the studio version before a passage played with his teeth, which arouses the enthusiasm of the crowd. The most interesting moment of the performance undoubtedly remains All Along the Watchtower. Often requested by his audience, Jimmy systematically refused to play the title, generally claiming that he did not know the words. Did the group take advantage of a possible sound check to rehearse the title? Noel Redding does not play on the studio version. In any case, Jimmy revised his text because he doesn't make any mistakes in the lyrics. This is also the case for the rest of the concert, and it's a good sign, because the performances where Jimmy starts to skip the singing are generally doubtful. The construction of this live version is similar to that of the studio version. It is thus closer to the 1970 versions. The complexity of the arrangement certainly produces some small approximations, but the essential is there. It is a successful performance, with particularly convincing singing at times. A member of the audience then calls out, "Hey Joe." Jimmy plays the introduction almost immediately. The tempo is a little fast, but that doesn't stop the experience from delivering a very good version. Generous with his audience, Jimmy rewards them with a second solo with his teeth. "Thank you very much. We still have 2 titles to go." Jimmy announces Voodoo Child, Slight Return, but takes the time to retune himself before attacking the most famous introduction to the wah-wah in the history of his instrument. Jimmy alternates between storm and calm in a more nuanced version than usual. Jimmy thanks Jerry Stickles for the rope change he made, calls out a name, and then warmly greets the audience. After a noisy start, we hear the first notes of the theme of Star-Spangled Banner, but it is in fact with Purple Haze that the group decides to conclude. The audience, of course, responds very favorably, clapping their hands to mark the beat. The audio quality, excellent until then, deteriorates considerably, before returning as before at the end of the first verse. The first solo initially takes up the thematic elements of the studio version. The last solo, violently noisy, reminds us of the wild versions of the beginnings of the experience. Finally, an excellent concert. The following is a concert review by the local press. The Magician with the Guitar. Jimi Hendrix excites at the Halle last night by K.A. You could see it immediately. This evening would bring a good mood. From all parts of the region, more than 3,000 young Jimi Hendrix fans had flocked to the Halle Münsterland to see their idol play and create magic. The spectators' outfits recalled dusty theatre wardrobes and mothballs. Before, however, the star of the evening performed, the heir apparent from Ireland warmed up. They succeeded partly, but the next intermission, announced by the organizer to change instruments, cooled the mood down again. As soon as the dark-skinned grandson of a Cherokee Indian dressed like a parrot entered the stage, the excitement grew boundless. The Halle had not seen this since the days of the Rolling Stones. Before the first string even started to ring, the excited youngsters stood on their seats. When Jimi Hendrix finally started his show, a combination of theatrics, gags and jokes, which is hardly surpassed. The reaction of the audience balanced between ecstatic roars and muffled silence. Occasional shouts, not coming from Jimi Hendrix for he does not need them, grew louder. Obviously, Jimi Hendrix attempts to personify the guitar, however the instrument remains a tool. Even when played by a master, it stays dependent not only on his big hands, but also on the gigantic amplifiers and speakers, some 50 pieces of which the magician with the guitar had set up on stage. His skill is truly masterful, because he technically controls every chord. His musicianship is unmistakable, and yet the whole thing has its drawbacks. Jimi Hendrix puts his talent in a pan, shakes it thoroughly, and what comes out of it is a salad, difficult to digest. It remains to be said that his audience seemed satisfied. They saw him, heard him, and cheered him. What remained was the rumble in your ears and the vivid memory of pop music's most extreme avant-garde musician. And the following review titled, Little Music to Enjoy by J. von Emmer. Jimi Hendrix is without a doubt one of the most fascinating people in pop music. Fascinating because he is exotic and unusual. No other pop star sports such a wonderful mop of curly hair. Also, the exceptionally beautiful rings on his hands are unmatched. They even beat Ringo's famous red ruby. Of course, the most exciting thing about him is his music. However, upon listening for a longer period of time, it makes you wonder more and more, especially because of the abandon of melodic domination. Jimi Hendrix has risen to international fame during the heyday of sensitive, heart-melting soul beat, even though he never was a very good singer, and the raw, denatured sound of his guitar had been irritating from the beginning. Third Stone from the Sun, a number from his first album, Are You Experienced, shows how far away from the current soul harmonies his sounds were right from the start. On his newest record, Electric Ladyland, the human voice and melody in the traditional sense play only a minor role. The guitar rules. A guitar, of course, which seems to be inexhaustible in its abundance of sound, its modulation, and its expressiveness. Due to the murderous acoustics of the Congress Saal, where Jimi Hendrix and his group performed, this masterful guitar could often only be guessed at most of the time. The generally young audience was paralyzed. Short applause at the end was the entire response to Hendrix's passionate musical appeal. One cannot warn foreign music groups emphatically enough against this music-hostile concert hall, in which even the Matthias Passion sounds strange. It is not only the unfortunate acoustics of the Congress Saal, which killed the music of the Jimi Hendrix experience. Of course, it was also largely the horrible architecture. Jimi Hendrix's music cannot be consumed as easily as the average symphonic concert or top 10 hit. It not only affects the hearing, but your whole body. It develops a magic power through its emphasis on the tonic, the keynote, which is being circled, varied in a repetitive though diverse way. This power can only be assimilated by an open listener who is free to move his body and whose eyes are not constantly put off by a bombastic cultural decor. Such may enhance the indulgence in melodies, but not the adoption of almost anti-cultural sounds like Hendrix's, which stimulate a totally emotional state. His invitation at the start of the concert to forget the room, the building, you're in church here, didn't help. The gold on the ceiling, the heroic mosaic works on the walls, the neatly arranged seats in the hall demolished all the magic of his music. When you want to hear how his music really sounds, stick to his latest double album Electric Ladyland. And one more, Jimi Hendrix is the loudest. The superstar from Seattle stars in Munich's Congress Saal by Ingelor Kuna. For those who attended the Jimi Hendrix concert, loud has become a new category. In comparison, the Rolling Stones are whispering pebbles. A highly explosive mixture of blues, beat, sex and shock, roaring and shrilling non-stop out of 48 speaker cabinets and 12 amplifiers. left the audience at the Kongresssaal. Surrealist painter May Zimmerman was among them, with numbed ears. Jimi Hendrix, the beat scene's beautiful wild one, the eccentric Sambo from Seattle, a Cherokee Indian's grandson, Sick, who believes he's making the only music that counts. With his electric guitar and every possible modern technical device, he brings space echo and galactic reverberations to the underground. Is this the new music of the spheres? What were Berman, Lovell and Anders, USA astronauts, listening to when they were raving up there about a precious stone on black velvet? Are we dealing with a cosmic or an acoustic misunderstanding here? After 30 minutes of warming up by Ira Apparent, a young Irish group that mocked roaringly all conventional ideas of folk music, superstar Mr. Hendrix, New York Times, sprang onto stage to mediate his experience, or, in the words of The Observer, to celebrate the Hendrix religion. "You are in church here," Hendrix suggested to the public in the dark. "Forget everything that happens outside this room." After that, the black Elvis Presley knew no mercy for his guitar for the next 50 minutes. He shakes and caresses it, plucks its neck, rubs it erotically along his body, pulls it to the ground, rides on it, and draws from it, with a furious love bite, previously unheard polyphonic screams. Says a female Hendrix fan after the experience, "I wouldn't like to be his guitar." That concludes this installment of the series. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will continue the deep dive into January of 1969 of the Hendrix story, including the additional German, French and Austrian gigs of the 1969 European tour. Don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any stories or anecdotes to contribute, we would love to hear from you.